Hello, folks. This is Valkor Drake Rider. It has been quite a while, but I'm finally back with a new project. We have Wizard101's first, to my knowledge, community-made rhythm game. I have actually been working on something else for a while now, but I decided to take a break from doing that because I was feeling kind of burnt out. And I think that's fairly evident since I haven't actually been around for the last couple of years to put anything out. But I plan to come back with maybe a couple tutorial videos and maybe start on another new project soon. But this is something I whipped out in the last couple months, and it was quite a bit of fun to make. So here we go. So right here we have kind of an entrance and a nice visual with just a bunch of flashing wallpapers, just to give kind of a funky feel to it. Over here, which we'll check out a little bit more later, we actually have a system for showing what your score is that you get, because we actually do have a score tracker on the rhythm game itself. But let's go ahead and jump right into the game, and we can check out what that actually looks like. Alright, so when you jump in, you're going to see 3 levers, and each of these represent different settings. So you can actually fail in this rhythm game, which will immediately kick you out of the song and force you to reset. You can turn that off if you want. There's also a new versus veterans mode, with veterans being more difficult, and new having roughly half as many notes, maybe slightly more for certain reasons that we'll talk about later. And then there are currently 2 songs. I kind of have an awkward amount of space left in the building, so there's arguably room for a 3rd song. But with the extra item space, bric-a-brac update coming up pretty soon, I should be able to absolutely include a 3rd song. So maybe I'll take some suggestions for that. Regardless, let's go ahead and start off. We'll start with part 1. We'll go on veterans. I'm not going to show you guys new today just because veterans is how I intend it to be played. New is just, if you want to try to practice and get into it a little better, or if veterans is feeling a little overwhelming, but you can always just throw on no death for that as well. We'll go ahead and let ourselves fail, and if I fail, then you can see what happens first, and then maybe we'll succeed afterwards. So let's give it a go. So you'll be able to see that there's 4 inputs. There's up, down, jump, and X. You'll also see that it flashes red when I miss a note. And I'll show you what happens if I miss quite a few notes. You'll see on the left-hand side, my fail meter starts going down to show that I'm getting close to failing. You'll also see on the right that we have a multiplier that jumps up to ×4 at max when we hit a certain number of notes in a row. And you'll see it drops down every time we miss a note as well. Before we get to the end here, I will go ahead and fail just to show you what that looks like. You'll also notice at the top that we have some numbers going on. We use the timer to represent the hundreds place. So you can see that we are currently just passing a score of 500. But we're going to go ahead and let ourselves fail here, and then we'll give it another go on part 2. So you can see what happens when we fail. We get a lose screen, and then we get immediately teleported back out, where we can start the whole process all over again. So let's go ahead and do that. You can see if we did succeed, we are getting into perhaps the 600 to 800 range, which would have been a B. And you'll also see here that these arrows and these numbers are absolutely something you get stuck on, but not too important to me when we have functions like this. All right. So let's go ahead and put it back on veterans, and we'll go over to part 2, and let's show you what happens when you actually win. And now that we've made it all the way through, you'll see that we get a different victory screen. We'll remember our score of 796 at the top, and as we teleport back out, we'll get to compare that to our little visual. Alright, so we'll go up, and we are just below 800, so we didn't quite make the cut for an A. You can see over 1,000 we consider an S. It's fairly difficult to do that. So, now that you've kind of seen a gist of kind of how it works, you might have noticed in that second song things are actually a little bit out of sync, which is totally fine. I know I've expressed it in earlier videos, but the game doesn't necessarily sync timings from timers perfectly, which can cause some items not to move at the same rates or positions consistently. So the songs, however, are stable. They'll always play in the background at the same tempo, so there can sometimes be more of a disconnect between the two of them. In this case, that's something that happened. Sometimes it'll be fast, sometimes it'll be slow, sometimes it'll be just right. So what I did is just to get it in the best ballpark possible to give the best level of consistency. But, you know, you could just say that adds to the difficulty of it. So now that you've kind of seen what it is, what the end product is, let's go through some of the functionality, some of the items that make it possible. All right, so here we are behind the scenes of everything. You can see that we have kind of the background visual textures loading in sort of at the same time for some of them. You can also see there's not actually that many of them involved. For the most part, we just reset the same individual blocks at a rate which keeps them in sync with their own visuals so that it appears that it's being constantly moved. Anyways, going on to the important stuff, let's get into what makes this whole thing work. So I'm actually going to move this out of the way for a second. We'll just do like so. Let's go all the way to the left, and then we can pull it back in a sec. All right, so a few main components here. We're not going to get into too much of the nitty-gritty of how things work, but we'll at least talk about the different systems that you're seeing. So the first and most important thing is the notes. How do the notes work? Where do they come from? How do we get them to time correctly? How does that all work? So for your song, what you'll see is that there are actually 6 sequence reflectors here. There's one at the top left and all the way over to the top right, and then there's 2 individual ones for your long notes. Each one of these is set up in basically the same way. So these sequence reflectors have an order of notes that they will summon to them when activated. So you'll notice that all of our assets for the notes are over here, and we use books and we use shrunken regal walls. And basically what this means is, let's say I have 5 pink notes in a row, and basically what you're going to see happen from your perspective over here is 5 notes drop down. But what's going to happen if we add a 6th is the first note will have reached the bottom and disappeared from your view by the time the 6th one would appear, and the 6th one will actually just be the first one getting looped back to the beginning and teleported back up top. So visually, you'll have seen 6 pink notes appear, but in actuality, there's only 5 physical objects that represent them. And that goes for all of the other note types. And that's kind of how we string it together. Otherwise, if I were to make a song by using an equivalent number of assets, I would have hundreds of books stacked at the exact appropriate distances all the way upwards. And you can imagine how that would be both item consuming and also very annoying to set up. So instead, we have this entirely timing based, which is where our sequence reflector rows over here come in. So these are chains of sequence reflectors. For those of you who didn't know, you can chain sequence reflectors together. I am going to go through a video on sequence reflectors soon. It's going to be my next one scheduled. So it's going to give you a little bit of a better idea of how that works. So each of these different sequence reflector chains is one of the songs. This one is the first song, and this is the second. It's very helpful to be able to shrink them down because you can imagine at full size just how much space these would otherwise occupy. I would have likely had to put them on the floor below to reduce the clutter. Fortunately, that's not the case. So basically what you're seeing here is we have a fast timer, and these fast timers are set to very specific number of activations per second. This one, I believe, is even a little bit more unusual, where you can see I use the on and the off timer to get it nice and precise. This one itself actually gets divided by, I believe it's 3. So you'll be able to see, if I can grab it real quick, that the first 2 slots in the sequence reflector aren't activated, but the third is. And what that means is this rate is being divided directly into 3 to get the most accurate tempo for the song. You'll also notice that there are slight tempo changes in the middle of the song. So in order to keep pace with the song, I have to make slight adjustments as it goes along by using additional fast timers to change the tempo partway through. This was possibly the most annoying part of this because it is difficult to judge very small tempo changes mid-song, so it takes a lot of experimentation to try to get, like I said, the right ballpark for lining up the notes with the music. But basically what these sequence reflectors are doing is, as you saw before with the books, I have an order of items that are being summoned. With these, I have an order of activations of those being done. So if this is going in tempo with the song, and I have my on beats, let's just say, in this row, and my off beats in the next row, I'm able to time exactly when I want certain notes to appear out of the different sequence reflectors. In order to chain these together, as a brief preview to the tutorial, you'll notice that in the 8th slot of each of these, I have them target themselves, and in the 7th, I have them target the next one. What'll happen is when you try to go up to the 8th spell slot, it will reduce itself back down to the 7th, which will then continuously every time add to the next one. That's how you can chain your sequence reflectors in strictly a forward motion. There is a way to set up doing it fully reversible, but we'll get into that another time. So that is the basic gist of how these songs and the timings for all of the notes are done. You can see I do use counters to save space in certain situations. Let's say that my column here, or my row here, which represents 16th notes, let's say for these, I don't run into any 16th notes for 20 measures. Instead of having enough sequence reflectors together to represent 20 measures, I can instead just add a count to these to tell me how many times this will be added to that it won't actually do anything. And that lets me save a lot of space by not having to have a giant row of sequence reflectors. I can just wait the number of beats that it takes to get ourselves to the next instance of a 16th note. The first song, you'll notice, actually doesn't have 16th notes. It's just quarter and eighth. It does have some triplets, but we don't exactly explore that functionality. We do, however, have triplets that we utilize in this, but those require me to create specific timing with extra fast timers, and I believe that is represented by this row right here. But that is basically how that works. So outside of how the songs were set up, we obviously care about the inputs, what the player is doing. So these right here represent when the notes are being detected. You'll see we have item detectors, which detect each of the specific type of objects that represent our notes. And when those are added to it, these computers receive one of their signals. When they receive that signal, they're only missing the other signal, the one that comes from you, in order to register that you hit a note. When that signal passes, in other words, when the timing of that note passes, which is determined by these, so you can see this actually represents the time you have to hit a note. before it is considered missed. And if these manage to count through all the way, you will essentially be registered as missing the note. Your multiplier will go down, and it will also affect your failure tracker. So that's generally how this is going to function. In terms of your inputs as a player, I'll go ahead and show you how this works. So, I recall I mentioned that I actually was working on another new project a while ago. This actually comes from that. It's something that I use in that. And it is very useful. So you may have seen in my previous Pong video that we had a small platform you were able to move across in order to detect forward and backwards movement so that you control where your paddle is to play the game. This is similar, just far more refined. Essentially what's happening is you have the smallest platform available, very shrunken tea ladle at your feet. So you have very minimal movement. You can only move forward and backwards a very small amount. And then you have two detectors which are placed in such a way that you can stand directly between them and not be detected by either. But if you move even the smallest amount forward or backwards, you will get detected. Now, what is actually happening is when you move forward, these detectors are triggering a fast timer, which tells everything here, including the platform under your feet, to also move forward with you. But as soon as your character stops moving forward, all of that now moves out of you until you hit the center, and leaving those detectors will stop their associated timer, preventing the whole system from moving. So what you run into is a system where you can move forward and the system moves with you and recenters you, and that detects that you have a forward movement for your game. That's your forward input. And then backwards, and it will do the same thing and detect your backwards movement, all while keeping you centered so that you're able to make those repeated motions again. Holding it, of course, will constitute activating it repeatedly, which, of course, will function to hit your long notes. This is why we only have long notes for going forward and backwards, is because the game can't detect you continuously holding space or X, but my system can detect you continuously holding forward or backwards. It's also why we don't have any long notes that are double long notes, because of course if you hold forward and backwards at the same time, you won't actually get forward and backwards movement. You'll only get the last input that you pressed. So that is basically how we measure that. This stuff up here is mostly just dealing with setting things up for the game, setting up the timing for when the song ends to show you the victory screen, things of that nature. So it's not too complicated or important to get into by comparison. Lastly, we'll go through some of the systems that operate to show you the score and the tracker for your closeness to failure. So this big row of timers is actually what represents your hundreds place score, and it operates in a very interesting way. So one of these counters, yes, this one, you can see is the display on screen counter to show you your ones and tens place score. When it hits 100, which is its test value, it's going to activate a reflector, and this reflector is going to reset it. So now you can begin tracking your ones place and your tens place again. And then it is going to add to these sequence reflectors. Now, something that's very important that's happening between these is you can see that it's chained together with another sequence reflector. Each of these is starting one of these timers. So in order, you will start each of the timers, and if you check the timers, you can see each of them are set to 1 minute for your hundreds, 2 minutes for your 200s, all the way up to my maximum expected score of 1300. So this can, in other words, track your score all the way up to 1400, basically. So that being the case, why is it that these timers, when turned on, stay? So if you actually activate a timer while it's already running, it will reset the time on it. So we just need to make sure that when you are doing your hundreds place, that the timer is being repeatedly activated at that time. The way that we can manage to do that is we have these fast timers, which will activate rapidly every second. That will cause your sequence reflector to evaluate, which will make it repeatedly recast whatever slot that it is on. That is how we constantly trigger and portray a timer as a form of score. On the other side of things, we have our failure meter, of course. Our failure meter, we actually use counters to designate because it gives us a range of numbers to represent when we should see the progress bar shift colors and amount. We have it set that when you hit a note properly, you add 1 to your score, or rather add 1 to the meter. You can see the meter itself has a capacity of 48, and dropping down to, say, below 32 on this one will make the meter shift down to another level, and dropping down beneath 16 will put you into the red. And then dropping down to 0, of course, is the trigger that will cause you to fail the game. Without getting too much into how each of the individual things work, that is the basic gist. We use counters to measure that. When you miss a note, you actually lose, I believe it is 6 progress, which means that missing 8 notes in a row will cause you to instantly fail, even if you are at the maximum for the meter. And of course, there are a bunch of extra things involved with the moving textures, the animations for winning and losing. This sword here, which represents when you hit a note, will teleport into a precise location to show the spark where the note is. And a plethora of other things that are all mishmashed together to make this, all these systems talk to one another and work properly. But that is just about it. So let me restore this to where it properly was real quick before I forget to do that, because of course that needs to be there for the failure screen. And thank you so much for joining me for this video. I hope that you found this interesting, and as always, if you have any additional questions or comments about the project, you can feel free to leave them in the comments section, and I'd be happy to respond. So I hope all of you have a swell rest of your day, and like and subscribe if you want to see more content like this. I'm excited to put out some new technologies I've been working with. I have some stuff that I think is going to really shock a lot of people. It's pretty incredible what's possible in this game, and I'm really excited to share some of these tools with all of you so that you can start using them in your own houses. So be looking forward to a sequence reflector tutorial and some other stuff, and have a good one. Thanks for watching. Bye.